The first thing I noticed was the light. It wasn't the warm glow of a sunrise or the harsh glare of a street lamp. It was something else entirely, a pulsating electric radiance that seemed to hum with a life of its own. The air smelled faintly, of ozone and something sweet, like burnt sugar. I blinked, trying to clear my vision, but the light only grew brighter, more insistent. I hadn't meant to end up here. One moment, I was running through the rain-soaked streets of downtown, my jacket pulled tight against the cold, and the next I was standing in front of a towering neon sign that read, Loki's Kingdom. The letters flickered erratically, as if they couldn't decide whether to stay lit or fade into darkness. Beneath the sign was a pair of massive double doors, their surfaces etched with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and writhe when I looked at them too long. I hesitated. This wasn't the kind of place you just walked into, but then again I wasn't exactly in a position to be picky. My pockets were empty, my luck had run out, and the people I owed money to weren't the forgiving type. I'd heard whispers about this place, a casino where the stakes were higher than money, where you could win back what you'd lost. I hadn't believed it at first, but now, standing here, I couldn't deny the pull of it. The doors swung open, before I could touch them, revealing a cavernous hall filled with the sounds of laughter, clinking glasses, and the rhythmic chime of slot machines. The air was thick with the scent of perfume and something sharper, like the tang of metal. The walls were lined with mirrors that reflected the room in dizzying patterns, making it impossible to tell where the real ended and the reflection began. I stepped inside, and the doors closed behind me with a soft click. "Welcome to Loki's Kingdom," a voice purred. I turned to see a man leaning against a marble pillar, his arms crossed and a sly smile playing on his lips. He was tall and lean, dressed in a tailored suit that shimmered like oil on water. His hair was a mess of dark curls, and his eyes, green as emeralds, seemed to glow in the dim light. There was something unsettling about him, something that made my skin prickle, but I couldn't look away. "Loki," he said, extending a hand. "Pleasure to meet you, Era." I froze. "How do you know my name?" He chuckled, a low melodic sound that sent a shiver down my spine. "I make it my business to know the names of everyone who walks through those doors, especially when they're as interesting as you." I didn't like the way he said that, like I was a puzzle he was already halfway through solving, but before I could respond, he straightened and gestured to the room around us. "Come, let me show you around. You're here for the game, aren't you?" "The game?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "The thread of fate," he said, his smile widening. "A game where the stakes are as high as they come. Win, and you can rewrite your past. Lose, and well—" He trailed off, his eyes glinting with mischief. "Let's just say you won't like the consequences. I should have turned around and walked out. I should have known better than to trust a man who looked like he'd stepped out of a myth. But I didn't. Instead, I followed him deeper into the casino, past tables where players gambled with gold coins and jewels, past machines that whirred and clicked with a life of their own. "Why me?" I asked as we walked. Loki glanced at me, his smile never wavering. "Because you're special, Era. You just don't know it yet." I didn't know what to say to that, so I stayed silent, my mind racing. What had I gotten myself into? We stopped in front of a door at the far end of the hall. It was smaller than the others, unmarked and unassuming, but something about it made my stomach twist. "This is where it begins," Loki said, his voice low and conspiratorial. "Are you ready?" I wasn't, but I nodded anyway. He opened the door and I stepped inside. The room was dark, lit only by a single spotlight that shone down on a table in the center. On the table was a deck of cards, their backs adorned with intricate designs that seemed to shift and change as I watched. Sitting at the table were 3 figures, their faces obscured by shadows. They didn't speak, but I could feel their eyes. "On me, weighing, judging." "The Norns," Loki whispered, his breath warm against my ear. "They'll be your opponents. Play well, Era. Your fate depends on it." I took a seat at the table, my hands trembling as I reached for the cards. The game had begun, and I had no idea what I was playing for. The cards felt heavy in my hands, their edges sharp against my fingertips. The designs on their backs swirled like smoke, forming shapes I couldn't quite make out. Serpents, ravens, and something that looked like a tree with roots that stretched into infinity. I glanced at the three figures seated across the table, their faces still hidden in shadow. The air was thick with tension, and I could feel the weight of their gaze pressing down on me. "The rules are simple," Loki said, his voice echoing in the dim room. "You'll draw a card and the Norns will do the same. Each card represents a moment from your past, a thread in the tapestry of your life. Your task is to decide whether to keep the thread as it is, or cut it and weave a new one." I swallowed hard. "And if I cut it?" Loki's smile was razor sharp. "Then you rewrite that moment. Change the choices you made, but beware, Era. Every thread is connected. Pull one, and the entire tapestry may unravel." I didn't like the sound of that, but I didn't have much of a choice. I was already in too deep. The first card I drew was the Eight of Ravens. As I turned it over, the room seemed to shift, the walls dissolving into a memory I hadn't thought about in years. I was 16 again, standing in the kitchen of our small apartment. My mother was at the stove, humming softly as she stirred a pot of soup. The smell of garlic and herbs filled the air, and for a moment everything felt normal, safe. But then the door slammed open, and my father stumbled in, his face flushed and his breath reeking of alcohol. He was shouting before he even crossed the threshold, his words slurred and angry. My mother tried to calm him down, but he wasn't having it. "You think you're better than me?" he roared, grabbing her arm. "You think you can just ignore me?" I stepped forward, my heart pounding. "Leave her alone." He turned to me, his eyes blazing. "Stay out of this, Era. This is between me and your mother." But I didn't back down. I couldn't. I grabbed his arm, trying to pull him away, but he was too strong. He shoved me and I fell, hitting my head against the edge of the counter. The last thing I saw before everything went black was my mother's face, pale and terrified. The memory faded, and I was back in the dark room, the card still in my hand. My chest felt tight, and I could feel tears prickling at the corners of my eyes. "That was the night everything changed," I whispered. Loki nodded. "A pivotal moment, a thread that shaped who you are. Do you keep it or cut it?" I hesitated. If I cut the thread, I could change that night. I could stop my father, protect my mother, maybe even keep our family together. But at what cost? What happens if I change it? I asked. One of the Norns spoke for the first time, her voice low and melodic. "The past is a fragile thing, mortal. Alter one thread, and you may lose more than you gain." I looked at Loki, searching for answers in his emerald eyes. "What would you do?" He leaned back, his expression unreadable. "I'm not the one playing the game, Era. This is your choice." I took a deep breath and placed the card back on the table. "I keep it." The Norns exchanged a glance, and Loki's smile widened. "Interesting choice. Let's see what comes next." The second card was the Three of Serpents. As I turned it over, the room shifted again, and I was plunged into another memory. I was older this time, maybe 22. I was sitting in a dingy bar, a glass of whiskey in front of me. Across the table was a man I'd met only a few hours ago. He was handsome, with a charming smile and a voice like honey. "You've got a good eye," he said, shuffling a deck of cards with practiced ease. "I could use someone like you." I raised an eyebrow. "Someone like me?" "Someone who knows how to take risks," he said, his smile turning sly. "Someone who's not afraid to play the game." I should have walked away. I knew that, even then. But I was young and reckless, and the idea of easy money was too tempting to resist. "What's the catch?" I asked. He leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. "No catch, just a little partnership. You help me, and I'll make sure you get your cut." I hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "Deal." The memory faded, and I was back in the room. My hands were trembling, and I could feel a knot of guilt tightening in my chest. "That was the night I made the worst decision of my life," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Loki tilted his head, his expression curious. "And yet, you survived. You learned. You grew. Do you cut the thread, Era? Or do you keep it?" I thought about it for a long moment. That decision had led me down a dark path, one filled with lies, betrayal, and loss. But it had also brought me here to this moment. I keep it, I said finally. The Norns nodded, their faces still hidden, but I could sense their approval. The third card was the Ace of Roots. As I turned it over, the room shifted one last time, and I was plunged into a memory I didn't recognize. I was standing in a forest, the trees towering above me like ancient sentinels. The air was thick with the scent of pine and earth, and the ground beneath my feet was soft with moss. In front of me was a woman I'd never seen before. She was tall and regal, with hair the color of moonlight and eyes that glowed like stars. She held a staff in one hand, its surface carved with runes that seemed to pulse with power. "You are not alone, Ira," she said, her voice echoing in the stillness. "Your blood carries the legacy of those who came before you. The gods watch over you even when you cannot see them." I wanted to ask her who she was, what she meant, but before I could speak, the memory faded. I was back in the room, the card still in my hand. My heart was racing, and I could feel a strange warmth spreading through my chest. "Who was that?" I asked, looking at Loki. He smiled, but there was something almost tender in his expression. "That, my dear, is a memory you were never meant to see, a thread that was hidden from you." "Why?" "Because some truths are too dangerous to know," one of the Norns said. "But now that you've seen it, you must decide. Do you keep the thread or cut it?" I didn't hesitate this time. "I keep it." The Norns nodded, and Loki's smile widened. "Well played, Aira. Well played." As the game ended, I felt a strange sense of clarity. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. But as I stood to leave, Loki placed a hand on my arm, his grip firm but not unkind. "The game is far from over," he said, his voice low and serious. "You've only just begun to unravel the threads of your fate." I looked at him, my heart pounding. "What do you mean?" He leaned in close, his breath warm against my ear. "There are more challenges ahead, Aira, and the stakes will only get higher." I didn't know what to say, but as I left the room, I couldn't shake the feeling that something big was coming, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for it. The door clicked shut behind me, leaving me standing in a narrow hallway lit by flickering candles. The air was cool and carried the faint scent of incense, something earthy and ancient. My heart was still racing from the game, and the weight of Loki's words lingered in my mind. "The game is far from over, Aira. You've only just begun to unravel the threads of your fate." I didn't know what that meant, but I could feel it in my bones. Something was coming, something big. The hallway led to a circular room, its walls lined with mirrors of all shapes and sizes. Some were tall and ornate, their frames carved with intricate runes. Others were small and cracked, their surfaces clouded with age. In the center of the room stood a single mirror, larger than the rest, its surface shimmering like liquid silver. "Welcome, Ira," a voice said, soft and melodic. Turned to see a woman standing beside the mirror. She was tall and elegant, her hair a cascade of silver that seemed to glow in the dim light. Her eyes were a piercing blue, and her presence was both calming and unnerving. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I am Skuld," she said, her voice echoing in the stillness. "One of the Norns, and this," she gestured to the mirror, "is the mirror of consequences." I stepped closer, my reflection shimmering in the silver surface. But it wasn't just my reflection. It was me, but different. Older, wiser, with eyes that carried the weight of countless choices. "What is this?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Glimpse of what could be," Skuld said. "Every choice you make, every thread you cut or keep shapes your future. This mirror shows you the consequences of those choices." I stared at the reflection, my heart pounding. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because the next choice you make will determine not only your fate, but the fate of the 9 realms," she said, her voice grave. "Loki has set you on a path, Ira, but the destination is yours to choose." Before I could respond, the surface of the mirror rippled, and I was pulled into another vision, I was standing on a battlefield, the ground littered with the bodies of gods and mortals alike. The sky was dark, lit only by the glow of burning ruins. In the distance I could see Loki, his face twisted with rage as he fought against a figure cloaked in shadow. "This is one possible future," Skuld's voice echoed in my mind. "A future where Loki's schemes plunge the 9 realms into chaos." The scene shifted, and I was in a lush meadow, the air filled with the sound of laughter and song. Loki stood at the center of a crowd, his smile genuine as he raised a glass in toast. "And this is another," Skuld said, "a future where Loki's mischief brings joy and balance to the realms." The vision faded, and I was back in the room, my reflection staring back at me. "Which future will you choose, Era?" Skuld asked. I didn't know. How could I? Both futures seemed equally possible, equally real. "I don't understand," I said, my voice shaking. "How can my choices affect the 9 realms?" Skuld smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Because you are more than you seem, Era. Your blood carries the legacy of the gods. Your choices have power." I wanted to argue, to deny it, but deep down I knew she was right. The memory of the woman in the forest, the one who had spoken of my legacy, flashed in my mind. "What do I do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "You must face the final challenge," Skuld said. "The mirror of consequences will show you the truth, but only if you are willing to see it." I took a deep breath and stepped closer to the mirror. The surface rippled again, and this time I didn't resist. The mirror pulled me into a vision of my own life, but it was fragmented like pieces of a puzzle scattered across time. I saw myself as a child, laughing with my mother in the kitchen. I saw myself as a teenager, standing up to my father. I saw myself in the bar, making the deal. That had led me here, but there were other moments too, moments I didn't recognize, moments that hadn't happened yet. I saw myself standing beside Loki, his hand on my shoulder as we faced an army of shadows. I saw myself alone in a dark forest, the mark on my hand glowing with power. I saw myself in a throne room, surrounded by gods and mortals, my voice ringing out with authority. "These are the threads of your fate," Skuld's voice echoed. "You must choose which to keep and which to cut." I reached out, my fingers brushing against the surface of the mirror. The threads of my life shimmered before me, each one pulsing with potential. "What happens if I cut them all?" I asked. "Then you rewrite your future," Skuld said. "But beware, Era, every thread is connected. Cut one, and you may lose more than you gain." I hesitated, my hand hovering over the threads. I could see the consequences of each choice, the ripple effects that would spread across time and space, and then I saw it, a thread that glowed brighter than the rest. It was the thread of my connection to Loki, the one that had brought me here. "This is the thread that binds you to him," Skuld said. "Cut it, and you will be free of his influence. But keep it, and you will be tied to his fate." I stared at the thread, my heart pounding. If I cut it, I could walk away, leave all of this behind, but if I kept it, I thought about Loki, about the way he had watched me during the game, the way his eyes had softened when he spoke of my legacy. I thought about the futures I had seen, the chaos and the joy, and I realized something. Loki wasn't just a trickster. He was a catalyst, a force of change, and maybe, just maybe, I could be the one to guide that change. I took a deep breath and made my choice. I reached out and grasped the thread, feeling its warmth spread through my hand. "I keep it," I said, my voice steady. The mirror rippled, and I was pulled back into the room. Skuld was gone, and the mirror's surface was still once more. But something had changed. The mark on my hand, the one Loki had left, was glowing brighter than ever. "Well done, Era," a familiar voice said. I turned to see Loki standing in the doorway, his smile wide and genuine. "You've passed the final challenge," he said, stepping closer. "And now the real game begins." The glow from the mark on my hand pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat, a constant reminder of the choice I had made. Loki stood before me, his emerald eyes gleaming with a mixture of pride and mischief. The air in the room felt charged, as if the very fabric of reality was holding its breath. "You've done well, Era," Loki said, his voice smooth and confident. "But the game isn't over yet. In fact, it's only just begun." I frowned, my mind racing. "What do you mean? I thought the mirror of consequences was the final challenge." Loki chuckled, a low melodic sound that sent a shiver down my spine. The mirror was merely a test, a way to see if you were ready for what comes next. The real challenge lies ahead. And what is that? I asked, my voice steady despite the unease coiling in my chest. Loki's smile widened, and he gestured to the door behind him. Follow me and you'll see. I hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Whatever was coming, I couldn't back down now. I had come too far. Made too many choices to turn away. We stepped through the door and into a vast open space that seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. The ground beneath my feet was a mosaic of shifting colors, like a living tapestry woven from threads of light and shadow. Above us, the sky was a swirling canvas of stars and nebulae, their patterns constantly shifting and rearranging themselves. "Welcome to the loom of fate," Loki said, spreading his arms wide. "This is where the threads of every life, every choice, every possibility are woven together." I stared in awe, my breath catching in my throat. The sheer scale of it was overwhelming, and yet there was a strange beauty to it, a sense of order amidst the chaos. "Why are we here?" I asked, tearing my gaze away from the spectacle to look at Loki. "Because you've proven yourself worthy," he said, his tone serious now. "You've faced your past, embraced your choices, and accepted the consequences. And now, you have the chance to shape the future, not just for yourself, but for the 9 realms. I shook my head, struggling to process his words. "I'm just a mortal. How can I possibly have that kind of power?" Loki stepped closer, his eyes locking onto mine. "You're more than just a mortal, Era. Your blood carries the legacy of the gods. Your choices have power because you believe they do. That's the secret, the truth that the Norns and the other gods have tried to keep hidden for centuries." Felt a surge of emotion, fear, awe, and something else I couldn't quite name. "What do you want from me, Loki?" He smiled, but there was no mischief in it this time. Only sincerity. "I want you to help me change the rules of the game. The Norns believe that fate is fixed, that the threads of destiny are unbreakable. But I've seen what mortals can do, how your choices can defy even the gods. Together we can create a new tapestry, one where fate is not a prison, but a canvas." I stared at him, my mind racing. It was a tempting offer, but I couldn't shake, the feeling that there was more to it than he was letting on. "What's the catch?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Loki's smile returned, but it was tinged with sadness. "The catch is that it won't be easy. The Norns will fight us every step of the way, and even if we succeed, there's no guarantee that the future we create will be better than the one we leave behind." I took a deep breath, my gaze drifting back to the loom of fate. The threads shimmered and shifted, each one representing a life, a choice, a possibility. I thought about everything I had been through, the pain, the loss, the moments of joy and triumph, and I realized that I didn't want to erase any of it. "I'll help you," I said, turning back to Loki, "but not to rewrite the past or control the future. I'll help you give people the freedom to choose their own path." Loki's eyes lit up, and for a moment he looked almost proud. "I knew I chose well," he said, his voice warm. "Come, Mira, let's get to work." The Norns appeared as soon as we approached the loom, their forms towering and imposing. Their eyes burned with anger, and their voices echoed like thunder. "You dare defy us, Loki?" Skuld demanded, her voice shaking the very air. "You dare challenge the order of fate?" Loki stepped forward, his expression calm but resolute. "The order of fate is a lie," he said, "a story you've told to keep mortals and gods alike under your control. But it's time for a new story, one where everyone has the power to shape their own destiny." The Norns hissed, their forms shifting and twisting like smoke. "You cannot win," they said in unison. "The loom is ours, the threads are ours. You have no power here." "Maybe not," Loki said, glancing back at me, "but she does." I stepped forward, my heart pounding. The mark on my hand was glowing brighter than ever, and I could feel its power coursing through me. I reached out, my fingers brushing against the threads of the loom. The moment I touched them, the world seemed to explode in a burst of light and sound. I could see everything, every life, every choice, every possibility. And I realized that I didn't need to control them. I just needed to set them free. I closed my eyes and focused, pouring all of my will into the loom. The threads began to shift, their patterns rearranging themselves into something new, something beautiful. Norns screamed, their forms dissolving into smoke as the loom rejected their control. And then, just like that, it was over.